This is Magnus Carlsen, the 5-time world chess champion. He's being shown chessboards and asked to identify the game in which they occurred.
This looks an awful lot like Tal Botvinnik. This is the 24th game from Silver, obviously.
It seems like superhuman ability. Well, decades ago, scientists wanted to know what makes experts like chess masters special. Do they have incredibly high IQs, much better spatial reasoning than average, bigger short-term memory spans? Well, it turns out that as a group, chess masters are not exceptional on any of these measures. But one experiment showed how their performance was vastly superior to amateurs. In 1973, William Chase and Herbert Simon recruited 3 chess players: a master, an A player, who's an advanced amateur, and a beginner. A chessboard was set up with around 25 pieces positioned as they might be during a game, and each player was allowed to look at the board for 5 seconds. Then they were asked to replicate the setup from memory on a second board in front of them. The players could take as many 5-second peeks as they needed to get their board to match. From just the first look, the master could recall the positions of 16 pieces, the A player could recall 8, and the beginner only 4. The master only needed half the number of peeks as the A player to get their board perfect. But then the researchers arranged the board with pieces in random positions that would never arise in a real game. And now, the chess master performed no better than the beginner. After the first look, all players, regardless of rank, could remember the location of only 3 pieces. The data are clear. Chess experts don't have better memory in general, but they have better memory specifically for chess positions that could occur in a real game. The implication is what makes chess masters special is that they have seen lots and lots of chess games. And over that time, their brains have learned patterns. So rather than seeing individual pieces at individual positions, they see a smaller number of recognizable configurations. This is called chunking. What we have stored in long-term memory allows us to recognize complex stimuli as just one thing. For example, you recognize this as pi rather than a string of 6 unrelated numbers. At its core, expertise is about recognition. Magnus Carlsen recognizes chess positions the same way we recognize faces. And recognition leads directly to intuition. If you see an angry face, you have a pretty good idea of what's going to come next. Chess masters recognize board positions and instinctively know the best move. To develop the long-term memory of an expert takes a long time. 10,000 hours is the rule of thumb popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, but 10,000 hours of practice by itself is not sufficient. There are 4 additional criteria that must be met. And in areas where these criteria aren't met, it's impossible to become an expert. So the first one is many repeated attempts with feedback. Tennis players hit hundreds of forehands in practice. Chess players play thousands of games before they're grandmasters, and physicists solve thousands of physics problems. Each one gets feedback. The tennis player sees whether each shot clears the net and is in or out. The chess player either wins or loses the game, and the physicist gets the problem right or wrong. The next requirement is a valid environment, one that contains regularities that make it at least somewhat predictable. A gambler betting at the roulette wheel, for example, may have thousands of repeated experiences with the same event, and for each one they get clear feedback in the form of whether they win or lose. But you would rightfully not consider them an expert because the environment is low validity. A roulette wheel is essentially random, so there are no regularities to be learned. There was an experiment carried out with rats and humans, where there's a red button and a green button that can each light up. 80% of the time the green button lights up, and 20% of the time the red button lights up, but randomly, so you can never be sure which button will light. And the task for the subject, either rat or human, is to guess beforehand which button will light up by pressing it. For the rat, if they guess right, they get a bit of food, and if they guess wrong, a mild electric shock. The rat quickly learns to press only the green button and accept the 80% win percentage. Humans, on the other hand, usually press the green button, but once in a while they try to predict when the red light will go on, and as a result, they guess right only 68% of the time. We have a hard time accepting average results, and we see patterns everywhere, including in randomness, so we try to beat the average by predicting the pattern. But when there is no pattern, this is a terrible strategy. Even when there are patterns, you need timely feedback in order to learn them. To understand the difference between immediate and delayed feedback, psychologist Daniel Kahneman contrasts the experiences of anesthesiologists and radiologists. Anesthesiologists work alongside the patient and get feedback straight away. Is the patient unconscious with stable vital signs? With this immediate feedback, it's easier for them to learn the regularities of their environment. Radiologists, on the other hand, don't get rapid feedback on their diagnoses, if they get it at all. This makes it much harder for them to improve. Radiologists typically correctly diagnose breast cancer from X-rays just 70% of the time. Delayed feedback also seems to be a problem for college admissions officers and recruitment specialists. After admitting someone to college or hiring someone at a big company, you may never, or only much later, find out how they did. This makes it harder to recognize the patterns in ideal candidates. So, if you're in a valid environment and you get repeated experience with the same events, with clear, timely feedback for each attempt, will you definitely become an expert in 10,000 hours or so? The answer, unfortunately, is no, because most of us want to be comfortable. For a lot of tasks in life, we can become competent in a fairly short period of time. Take driving a car, for example. Initially, it's pretty challenging, but after 50 hours or so, it becomes automatic. After that, more time spent driving doesn't improve performance. If you wanted to keep improving, you would have to try driving in challenging situations, like new terrain, higher speeds, or in difficult weather. Now, I have played guitar for 25 years, but I'm not an expert because I usually play the same songs. It's easier and more fun. But in order to learn, you have to be practicing at the edge of your ability, pushing beyond your comfort zone. You have to use a lot of concentration and methodically, repeatedly attempt things you aren't good at. To become an expert, you have to practice for thousands of hours in the uncomfortable zone, attempting the things you can't do quite yet. True expertise is amazing to watch. To me, it looks like magic, but it isn't. At its core, expertise is recognition, and recognition comes from the incredible amount of highly structured information stored in long-term memory. To build that memory requires 4 things: a valid environment, many repetitions, timely feedback, and thousands of hours of deliberate practice. When those criteria are met, human performance is astonishing.